I got a cop fired, and now I think he's stalking me. To give context, I used to be a 911 dispatcher for a small city. We dispatched all law, fire, and EMS for the entire county, and within this county were multiple law agencies. I had been there for about 3 months or so when I met him. Let's call him Jake. Jake had recently transferred from a big department in California and landed himself randomly at our department. It didn't make much sense as to why he left California in the first place, but he always insisted it was just time for him to move to the smaller, less dangerous department. Him and I quickly became close and would chat almost every day after I got off shift. Within a few months, it became apparent that we liked each other, and our flirting progressed into something more serious. Fast forward a few months later, and it turns out he was doing some inappropriate things to photos and videos of me whilst he was actively on duty. This, and a few other things he had kept hidden on duty, led to him losing his license and leaving. During the process of his termination, his sergeant had suggested I get a protective order against him, as he had made threatening statements previously towards me, such as, "You better be telling the truth. I'll find out on Tuesday if you're lying to me," etc. I had began to fill out the paperwork and was told I had a temporary protective order on him in the meantime, but don't think I ever did. About 2 weeks after his termination, he calls me to catch up. The entire call is like an old friend to an old friend. What am I doing for work? Do I have a boyfriend now? But progressively, turns more personal. When does my shift end? What do I drive? Being 18 and naive, I treated him like I always had, answering his questions. I had contacted his old department afterwards, as his sergeant had told me to let him know if I was ever contacted again, but they turned me away pretty quickly and didn't want anything to do with it. With that, I blocked Jake. Roughly a month later, I get a call from a new number, and it's Jake. Once again, he wants to meet up and catch up, but this time, he so casually goes on to tell me about this new house he's wanting to buy in my neighborhood, knowing it's my neighborhood. I had never told him where I lived in town, let alone what specific neighborhood. During this call, he progressively got more aggressive as well, making statements such as, "If I knew I was going to get canned, I should have just had my way with you." He half-heartedly joked about getting a hotel room just for me, and that was that. A few days later he FaceTimed me, and once again, came off as simply wanting to catch up as he was sick. Midway through our seemingly normal conversation, he makes it apparent he's been touching himself this entire time. Keep in mind, nothing suggestive was mentioned, and our conversation at that point was about his new dog. He's blocked me once again, but has tried to follow my social media, and now, I've started to see him in my area. Last I knew, he lived nearly 30 to 45 minutes in the opposite direction from me. Am I reading into this? Or should I genuinely consider this stalking? Five kids, home alone. Okay, so bear with me. This happened when I was a kid, and I double-checked the story with my family. So this was in the mid-80s. I was about 7, at home with 2 of my older sisters, 8 and 11-ish, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8-ish, all 5 girls. My sister was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to picture what our house looked like to understand what happened. It was a 2-story box house, with a flat roof and a smaller box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house. We kept hearing noises coming from the roof like walking, and what sounded like rocks being dropped down the downspouts. You know, kids. We thought of a squirrel or something, but it kept happening. Then my older sister said something about how maybe someone climbed the huge tree besides the house and got on the roof. We were all scared because we knew there was a roof access point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters. What if he could get inside? My oldest sister told my other sister and one of our cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, and on the way back, look up and see if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls, both about 8 years old, walk halfway across the parking lot, and being curious kids, turned around, looked up, and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s guys cropped-topped football jerseys. He was crouched down on the roof. The girls came running home freaking out and told my older sister about the guy, My older sister, freaking out, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on our roof, but couldn't see anything. She came home and then called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up. When they got there, I don't think they believed the word we said. They thought a bunch of little kids were making up the story for attention. One cop drove down the road and up a hill about a block away to see if they could see anything, but the way the roof was, you couldn't see a person if they were laying. Then these cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls, from ages 7 to 11, sent upstairs scared shitless, crying, to look for this man, knowing nothing about roof access. We all cried not wanting to go, but they said we had to. To this day I remember how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us, didn't check the house, inside or out, and left. We were so scared to be left alone with the guy out there. Who knows where? We didn't know if he was just laying down on the roof, jumped down, or somehow got in and was hiding. My mom finally got home a few hours later, and we told her what had happened. My mom explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access, and no one could get in, but she checked anyways, then went to check out the outside. There were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good from him jumping off the roof, onto the porch, and off into the flower bed. My mom was so steaming mad when she realized we told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the police station the next day, and were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mom went up one side of the cops and down the other. We never found out who the guy was, or why he was there. Did he know it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? Mid-90s terror. I grew up in the 1990s, born in the late 80s, and I remember getting my first bike and starting to explore the area in which I grew up in upstate New York. Where I grew up is much different now. In the 90s, it was more rural, with clusters of neighborhoods here and there. I lived near an old capped landfill, and the main road connected a lot of semis down to some factories in a neighboring town that was like a 5-minute bike ride. We also had an old Baptist church that was founded by an eccentric former hippie who was really good to the community. My dad, who was a very serious drinker, loved to fish, hunt, etc. with his friend because it gave him an excuse to drink and kill something. But he ended up making a deal with this pastor and the gentleman who owned the pond behind the church to stock it with fish, as at this time, my dad and his friends started becoming serious competitive fishers and went in on a boat, which my dad had to sell his share to eventually keep drinking. So my friends and I had permission to fish there in the summer, and we would go down and swim and all that. I lived easily less than 5 minutes from this pond, and my friends and I would go there one summer day. This was around 1995. My mom had heard on the news a week prior about a wave of kidnappings. I don't remember if Amber Alerts were a thing then, so she decided to make a code with me. She came to me and told me if anyone ever tried to convince me that they knew my mom or dad, in the hopes to get me in their car, to ask them for a code word. Ours was pickles. So fast forward to our fishing trips. My friends leave before me after we sat around, and actually just swam more than anything. My friend Dennis got mad because he was serious about fishing, so he and his brother left, and I was alone on the road. As the road, once you get past this farm, was a straight shot to the main part of town, and our road was on the right, just before the road ended. So I get to the road, and I'm about to turn, and didn't notice I was being followed by a beige-colored pickup with this Cletus-looking guy from The Simpsons in it. He greets me and tells me that my mom and dad are waiting for us at a local restaurant, which I knew. He tells me that they asked him to come get me and to meet them there so we can all have dinner. I immediately thought of what my mom said, and I started to get this evil feeling like I was in danger. So I told him that my parents specifically have a password that they give their friends, and that if he was their friend, he was required to tell me, at which point he got mad and started swearing at me. Although I didn't see one, I was certain he had a gun, as he started fumbling in the truck. I turned and started pedaling down my road, screaming for help and that I was in danger. He jerked his truck to follow, but I was making too much noise and was already to my house that he just took off. When I got home, my mom was home, and I was hysterical and asked her why she would ask such a mean friend to pick me up, and I told her what happened and she didn't believe me. Then she calmed me down, told me I did the right thing, but I could tell she had a hard time believing me. She also grew up in the same town, and nothing like that had happened to her. A few days later, a friend of hers tells her a similar story of her son on another part of our town. The police then were involved, and the cops came and talked to me, and I gave them the same description of the man, the truck, what had happened, etc. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I used to be very bitter at my mom for not believing me, but now I understand the confusion she had, and instead of reacting, she just tried to console me and keep an eye on everything. My dad, on the other hand, was more vigilant about it, and would ask me all the time when he'd take me out if someone looked like that guy, or if a truck looked the same as the one I saw. I hope no other kids were harmed by him. Armed men outside my front door. I have been a long-time reader of this subreddit, so it is honestly kind of surreal that I now find myself writing about an experience I had very recently. It was a Friday night, and I had gone to bed early, as I had work on Saturday morning. After reading in bed for a bit, I drifted off at around 10:30 p.m., only to wake up about an hour later to loud screams and people yelling profanities. I thought my girlfriend was watching a movie with the volume way up, and I went out to the lounge room to ask her to turn it down a little. Instead, the TV was off, and my girlfriend was staring at the front door with her eyes wide. Our apartment is on the ground floor of the building, and so our front door opens directly out into the lobby of the building. The voices in question were coming directly from the lobby. I could not make out specifics. In my defense, I was half asleep, and the language of the country I live in is not my first language, but there was a lot of swearing involved. My first thought was that it was some kind of domestic dispute, but after listening, I realized it was a group of men that sounded extremely aggressive. I looked at the WhatsApp group chat for my apartment building, and to my horror, saw a message from one of the people in it that there were armed men in the building and that we should not leave our flats. The country I live in is experiencing a marked uptick in crime, and I had heard some stories of armed groups of men robbing entire apartment blocks, but these had seemed fairly apocryphal to me. However, that was my first thought, that these men would kick down the door and rob us. One of my dogs started to growl at the commotion outside. I shushed him, and thankfully he obeyed. I heard a commotion in the apartment above me, and went out to my patio to see what was happening. I heard what sounded like a large piece of furniture being knocked over, and women and children screaming in terror. At this point, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that by now, they would have robbed us already, if that's what they had planned to do. My girlfriend and I decided to hide in a small shed at the end of our patio, monitoring the group chat on our phones. Our bigger dog silently stood watch outside the door of the shed, his eyes locked on the sliding door at the end of the patio. I would find my smaller dog later, cowering between the washing machine and the dryer. After 10 extremely tense minutes, I heard the screeching of tires, signaling what I hoped was the perpetrators fleeing the scene. Eventually, someone in the group chat said the police had arrived, and breathing a huge sigh of relief, I came out of hiding and opened the front door. Alarmingly, on the floor of the lobby, there were zip ties that had been cut, and the security guard was talking to one of the tenants. The man was bleeding from a large gash on his face and looked extremely shaken. Over the next few hours, the story would unfold. The man I saw, with the gash on his face, was the tenant of the upstairs apartment, the one that I had heard the commotion coming from. He was the owner of an import/export business, and for whatever reason, had a sizable sum of money, in cash, hidden in his apartment. Someone had obviously found out about it and planned out the robbery that woke me from my sleep on Friday night. A group of 8 men had followed him into the apartment building's garage and ambushed him as he got out of his car, and judging by the gash on his face, roughed him up a bit. Some of the group of 8 had gone to the lobby, surprised the security guard, and zip-tied him. The remainder of the group had gone up to the apartment, robbed it, and then fled the scene. It's fairly chilling to think that armed men were mere meters from my front door. So to the armed men that stormed my apartment building to steal my neighbor's cash, let's not meet. Joey crack. This happened while in my early 20s. My best friend was always getting into risky shit. While she did various drugs, I was always more of a pothead. When they say pot was a gateway drug, I believe it's true to a certain extent. With those who have addictive personalities, she definitely developed an addiction issue later on. My friend, her name was KK, was always down to meet people. She used to friend random people on Facebook or Instagram. She would ask me to hang out, so that way, when she met people, I was the buffer, just in case they didn't like each other. One day, she came over to my house unannounced and was like, "Hey, let's go to my uncle's house," because her aunt was there, and her aunt had some goods. Her aunt and uncle were known dealers in the area, so we went. When we got there, she was like, "Hey, I met this guy online. He goes by Joey Crack." Then she shows her aunt his picture, and it's a wide-set man with a red goofy face, cornrow braids, face tattoos, and the gold grill. I laughed and said, "Wow, Kay, you really know how to pick 'em." She had already invited him over, so upon his arrival, he then comes out of nowhere where he just walks right up and gives Kay a hug, and everyone else there a kiss on the cheek. This part of town, there was nothing around, just houses, a school, and woods. Closest store was about 20 minutes, so it struck me as odd that he walked here. So it was me, Kay, her aunt, and the aunt's friend. We sit and get 3 joints in rotation. By this time, both aunts are high as a kite on coke. They take a few puffs, then they go inside the house, leaving me, Kay, and Joey Crack outside. Joey then starts asking us questions, like how we know each other, what we do for a living, etc. It was getting late, so I was telling her I was going to go home. She was like, "No, don't go yet." I told her I was tired, and that Joey is weird, and he kept low-key hitting on me. She then tells me he asked to sleep with her, and he wanted to ask her if I was down. I laughed it off and said, "You're crazy." After a while of silence, I deflected and heard some noise that was in the darkness. "You heard that?" After a bit of small talk between him and Kay, he then learned that neither of us were interested. It was just a hangout. This then turns the mood. You can feel it. It was suddenly quite eerie. He got reserved and shifty-eyed. I sat down for a while just to please Kay. At one point, I turned to Joey, knowing he walked here, and it was dark by now. "What are you about to do?" "'Cause I'm about to go home, and Kay's coming with me." He was like, "I just texted my boy. He's about to come get me." When he was texting, Kay was right behind him watching him text. Her eyes grew wide, and she looked at me. That was silent girl code for, "Bitch, what the fuck?" Kay broke the silence and was like, "Hey, come help me get this thing from inside and bring it out." So I did. We went inside and she was like, "I'ma call my uncle so he can take us to your place." I was like, "Why? My house is like a 10-minute walk." And she said, "'Cause when she was looking at Joey's texts, he sent it to whoever was coming to pick him up, the information of all of us here. He noted that her aunt was high on coke, as us along with our age. He was telling his boy to come over, to basically rob and essay us, and called it dibs on the blonde one. I was the blonde one. Every hair stood up on my body, with the thought of some gross goon trying to have his way with me. I was mad, 'cause she got me into this shit. We came back out and continued our conversation with him so he wouldn't get suspicious of us. She mentions out loud that her uncle was on his way home. As he pulls in, a sigh of relief comes over me. They speak briefly, and Joey then departs into the darkness before his ride even shows up. Kay and I get a ride from her uncle to my house. On the ride, we noted how weird Joey was. Later that night, as I was going to bed, I checked my Facebook, and I have a friend request from Joey, and a message. "You're so pretty. I would love to have some alone time with you without your friend." The message ended with his number. I never blocked someone so fast. After this, Kay didn't learn her lesson, but that's another story for another time. A week later, Joey was in the news. He was wanted for SA, robbery, and drug possession. A bullet well missed on my part. Joey Crack, let's never meet again. The creepy hotel owner who thought he could. After reading many of the stories in this subreddit, it reminded me that I have one I thought I had forgotten. I'm a South American woman, but I've been living in the States for about 11 years now. I first moved to Colorado when I was 21, to the small town of Silverthorne. I was recruited by an exchange student program. for college students in South America to come to the USA, work, and travel during the summer breaks in the South. Up to that point, I had never seen snow in my life, so I was extremely excited to be living in a cold, snowy place for once. I was going to be working at a very popular hotel in the town of Frisco, not too far from the hostel I was living in. The hostel itself had its own creepy stories, but I won't talk about them in details at the moment. So far, I didn't know exactly what kind of job I would be doing in the hotel. All I knew is that I was supposed to show up there on a certain date and time to talk to the owner, a Ukrainian-American guy that was probably in his mid-40s back then. So I show up, introduce myself with the basic English I had at the time, and tell him I'm excited to start working there. He gives me a weird, long stare, almost as if he was analyzing me. He was a tall man with very pronounced eyebrows, so that kind of creeped me out for a second. He then showed me to the restaurant and said I would be working there as a hostess, besides delivering room service orders. I really didn't think my English was that good to be in close contact with the public back then, but he insisted. For those who are familiar with the area, this part of Colorado is not too far from Vail, so it's needless to say they get very, very busy there during ski season, and I was dealing with customers from all over the world. That's when I also started helping out as a server during breakfast, and of course, would get lots of orders wrong by my lack of English, which made the owner very mad. I remember one time that my coworker and friend was taking a little bit longer to wipe down one of the tables when we had guests waiting to be seated. So he grabbed a towel from her hand, yelled at both of us to get out of his way, and stop being so damn useless, then proceeded to throw the towel at her face. Let me just make a small note here to say that the girl was also an immigrant like me, with fantastic English and living in the country for years, but he would always try and find ways to show us how slow, dumb, or inferior we were compared to him, an American citizen. Then at night, after the place had slowed down, he would always act all apologetic and buy us drinks at the bar, make forward comments about my appearance, and even caress, my legs. I was starting to feel uncomfortable around him, and would always try not to be in the same room as he was. During work hours, I would be focused on customers or talking to my coworkers, and I would never make eye contact with him if he was present. On New Year's Eve that year, there was a big incident in the hostel I lived at. I was out that night with a few coworkers, but learned later that one of the residents had gotten way too high on who knows which drug and started chasing down one of my friends inside the hostel while pointing a gun at him, yelling racist slurs, and making death threats. He got arrested, but it was easy to say that most of the students living there no longer felt safe. While telling about the incident to one of my coworkers the next day, the big boss overheard the conversation and immediately came to check on me and make sure I was okay. I thought he was being nice and thanked him for checking. He said I should not be staying at the hostel anymore, given the circumstances, and invited me to stay in one of the hotel rooms, free of charge for the next 2 weeks, while I looked for a new place. That seemed very generous of him, especially given the fact that the hotel would be completely booked often. Since it was the peak of ski season, I accepted his offer and moved in the next day. I was so overwhelmed with happiness for finally having some privacy and for getting some extra sleep before my breakfast shift, since I was now literally living at work. This was until one night later that week, where I felt extremely exhausted after being slammed in the restaurant all day and delivering orders to several rooms. I was ready to get cozy in my hotel room and go to sleep. I think it was around 2 a.m. when I woke up completely groggy and noticed that my door room was open. I could see the lights in the hallway. Then I noticed the silhouette of a tall person standing inside my room and watching me sleep. I couldn't see a face, but I could definitely tell it was a man. As I start realizing what's going on, I hear a metal clinking noise, as if he was ready to take his belt off. "What the fuck?" I yelled. That person quickly got out of my bedroom. The next day, I asked management and my coworkers and said there was definitely someone in my room the night before. They said I was probably dreaming, or someone from housekeeping must have gotten into the wrong room. Wrong room? At 2 a.m? Housekeeping? The owner didn't comment on the case and stopped talking to me or even acknowledging my presence after that. To my relief, of course. Nothing else happened. I moved on, got a new job, a new apartment to live in, etc. About a year after my little incident, while checking the local Summit Daily News, who do I see on the front page? Him, the owner. He had been arrested the night before after getting 2 female hotel guests way too drunk at the bar and letting himself into their rooms once they had crashed for the night. They woke up, and there he was, standing in the room staring at them while getting ready to make his next move. They screamed bloody murder and called the police immediately. Was it him in my hotel room that night? I'm 99% sure it was, but I'm kind of relieved I didn't get to find that out. What creeps me out the most about this situation is that what about those nights I completely crashed after one too many drinks? You know how the altitude can affect your alcohol tolerance? And oh man, it really did it for me. I'm from the sea level and not a big drinker, but a few times I woke up with zero memories from the night before. So the unsettling question is, was that the first time someone got in my room? And how many more guests at this hotel had had this happen to them without even realizing it? Someone is watching me. So I have never posted on this sub, though I have other stories I've buried deep until recently, but this is happening in the present. I've had people stalk and follow me before, and because of that and my true crime addiction, I've become supremely paranoid and a solid curtain twitcher. I reside in an upstairs room that was my first room to myself as a child. I had to leave a bad situation and therefore ended up back at my childhood home. For reference, when our house was built, we were told that the field to our left would one day soon be a development. It was 2000 when we were told that, and it wasn't until 2022 that the roads started being formed and foundations laid. I had already had someone follow me home before when I was young, but I was in a different bedroom next door. My parents put in a free library that's right below my window and nighttime security lights that were very bright and turn on if you're within 20 feet of the side of my house my room is on. I'll admit, having an open field next to me so long made me accustomed to not closing the curtains when I change, because there was never anyone to watch. Now there is. For the past 2 weeks, the burglar lights next to the free library have been going off late at night because my one side of the curtain is open so I can use my vape. That's the only reason I noticed it at all. I didn't think too much at first. We lock all the doors and windows every night, and I'm on the second floor. I also always looked out to see if it was a car, someone walking their dog, or a deer, only to see nothing. To add, they put in a shit ton of streetlights around this area so visibility is great, but it just kept happening. So last night I did my usual and saw the lights come on out of my peripherals. I acted natural, giving full view out the window I was going to bed. It was about 3 a.m., turning the TV off, closing the windows and curtains, and turning the lights out. Then, I ducked down, peering through the curtains to the sidewalk below. I honestly thought I was going to pass out, when after a few minutes, maybe 5, someone comes out from the side of my house, all silhouette dressed in black. They kept their back to me until the light turned off, but I swear I could still see them standing there, looking up like they could see me. I called the police, but while I was on the phone with the operator, I saw him run off. There wasn't much they could do, except say they'd have a car drive around and look. My parents are asleep and I know I have to tell them tomorrow. This scares the crap out of me. If it hadn't been happening for weeks and was a solo incident, I would probably be fine about it. But the fact that the light has been going off without me seeing activity and what happened tonight makes me think that this person has been watching me and watching my house. To the person outside my window, let's please never meet. Small update. I did tell my parents, and at first they brushed me off, claiming I'd had a couple drinks and it was late, so I probably just saw someone checking out the library. I then had another conversation about it with just my dad, who said that there had been reports the last couple weeks of car break-ins, and since my car is parked on the side of the street right outside my window, maybe they were trying to break into it. I had pointed out that if he was trying to get into my car, why was he pressed up against the house where he wasn't visible from my window? And why did he at no point go towards my car? I think I freaked him out enough that we were potentially going to get a camera for that area. Given all the development happening around us, I think it's smart even without this incident. Thank you all for your advice and replies. I'll update here again if anything happens. And as of now, the updates end here, and so does the video. Make sure to subscribe and turn on post notifications so that you don't miss out on the next upload. And as always, thanks for watching.